A poor mechanic fixed a stranded woman's truck only to discover she was a billionaire on the run. The storm had rolled in fast, swallowing the quiet town in darkness. Rain hammered against the rooftops, washing the streets clean under flickering streetlights. It was the kind of night that kept people indoors, curled up by fireplaces, safe behind locked doors. But not Daniel Carter. He was exactly where he always was. His small auto shop at the edge of town, sleeves rolled up, hands covered, in grease fixing things no one else could. He was used to the silence, to the solitude, until she showed up, a truck sputtering to its last breath, a girl drenched in rain, eyes filled with something Daniel couldn't quite place, fear, desperation. Or was it something more? Mia was a mystery from the start. She didn't belong here. And yet, for reasons he couldn't explain, he found himself drawn to her. What happens when a man who has given up on love meets a woman who is running from everything she's ever known? What happens when two lives, so different yet somehow intertwined, collide in a way neither of them expected? One storm brought them together, but will love be enough to make her stay? If you're ready for a story filled with romance, self-discovery, and the kind of love that defies all odds, then stay with us. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and settle in, because The Mechanic and the Millionaire is about to take you on a journey you won't forget. Now, let's begin. The rain came down in sheets, drumming against the tin roof of Daniel Carter's small auto repair shop. It was a stormy night, the kind that kept most people indoors, nestled in the warmth of their homes. But Daniel was used to being out in the elements, hands slick with oil and grease, fixing what others had given up on. He wiped his hands on a rag and glanced at the clock. Almost midnight. Another long day, another handful of repairs done for. Free. Some called him a fool for refusing to charge struggling customers, but he never saw it that way. It was just who he was, a man who knew what it meant to need a helping hand. The storm roared louder, and just as he was about to close up for the night, headlights flickered through the rain. A truck, old, beaten up, barely holding itself together, crawled down the road toward his shop. Then just as it reached the entrance, the engine sputtered, coughed, and died. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and stepped into the rain. The cold bit through his flannel shirt, but he ignored it, making his way to the vehicle. A figure sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel as if willing the truck to move. When he knocked on the window, the driver hesitated before rolling it down. A woman. Young, maybe late 20s, wrapped in a rain-soaked jacket, her brown hair plastered to her forehead. Wide, uncertain eyes met his. "Truck's dead," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. Daniel nodded. "Sounds like it. You need help?" She hesitated again, as if weighing whether to trust him. Finally, she nodded. "Yeah, it just stopped." "All right," he said, stepping back. "Pop the hood." She fumbled with the latch, and Daniel lifted the hood, letting the flashlight's beam cut through the darkness. The engine was in bad shape, wires frayed, parts rusted, as if it hadn't been properly maintained in years. He sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. "You're lucky you made it this far," he muttered. She shifted in her seat. "Can you fix it?" "Not tonight, but I can tow it to my shop and take a look in the morning." A flash of worry crossed her face. "How much will that cost?" Daniel studied her. Her clothes were simple, worn but clean. Her hands, though slender, had no calluses, no signs of hard labor. Something about her didn't quite fit, but he wasn't sure why. "I'll tow it for free," he said. She looked at him, surprised. "Why?" "Because it's the right thing to do." Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to argue, but then she simply nodded. "Thank you." An hour later, the truck was safely parked outside Daniel's shop, and he handed her a towel and a steaming cup of coffee. "You got a name?" he asked, leaning against the workbench. She hesitated, then nodded. Mia. All right, Mia. Where you from? She glanced at the rain-splattered window, as if considering her answer. Nowhere, really, just passing through. Daniel arched a brow. This town isn't exactly a tourist stop. A faint smile flickered across her lips. I like quiet places. He studied her again. She didn't look like someone who belonged in a town like this. Her jacket was too new, her voice too polished. But he didn't push. Everyone had their secrets. You got a place to stay. She shook her head. I was planning to sleep in my truck. Daniel sighed. Not a good idea in this weather. There's a motel down the road. Not fancy, but dry. She hesitated. I don't have much money, he exhaled, rubbing his face. All right, I got a spare cot in the back. It ain't much, but it's better than your truck. She looked at him, eyes searching his face as if trying to read his intentions. You don't even know me, he shrugged. Don't need to, just know you need a place to sleep. For a long moment she didn't say anything. Then finally she nodded. Thank you, Daniel. He paused. Did I tell you my name? She stiffened slightly, but covered it quickly with a small smile. It was on your sign outside. Daniel didn't reply. But something about her answer didn't sit right. He pushed off the workbench and gestured toward the back. Come on, I'll show you where you can sleep. As she followed him, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he had. Just let a mystery walk through his door. Daniel had always been a man of simple routines. He woke up early, made himself a cup of black coffee, and got straight to work in his garage. The scent of motor oil and metal filled the air, and the rhythmic clang of tools against steel was the only music he needed. It was predictable, steady, a life he had built with his own hands. But this morning was different. As he stepped into the shop, stretching his shoulders, his gaze drifted to the cot in the back room. The blankets were neatly folded, the pillow undisturbed. For a moment, he thought Mia had left before sunrise, vanishing into the storm as mysteriously as she had arrived. Then he heard it, the faint clatter of dishes from the small kitchenette. He turned the corner and found her standing by the counter, fumbling with a coffee maker that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Her brows were furrowed in concentration, and she was staring at the buttons like they were written in another language. You planning to blow up my kitchen? Daniel asked, leaning against the doorway. Mia jumped, nearly knocking over the coffee pot. She spun around, looking guilty. Sorry, I just thought I'd make some coffee as a thank you. Daniel smirked. That thing hasn't worked right in years. She sighed, setting the pot down. Figures. I'm not exactly great with machines. That much was obvious. She narrowed her eyes at him, but there was no real bite in her expression. If anything, she looked more amused than annoyed. Daniel crossed the room and poured himself a cup from his own stash. He took a slow sip before studying her again. She looked different in the daylight, less like a lost traveler and more like someone trying very hard to blend in. The rain had washed away some of the dust on her clothes, and now, up close, he could see that her jacket was made of high-quality leather, the kind that didn't belong to a drifter. So, what's your story? He asked, breaking the silence. Mia hesitated, wrapping her hands around a mug of tea she must have found in his cabinets. I already told you. I'm just passing through. Daniel arched a brow. Most people passing through don't drive an old truck held together by duct tape. And they usually know how to work a coffee maker. She gave him a small, almost teasing smile. Maybe I just like a challenge. He wasn't convinced. There was something off about her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on, but he wasn't the type to pry. People had their reasons for keeping secrets. Lord knew he had enough of his own. Instead of pushing, he gestured toward the garage. Come on, let's see what we're dealing with under that hood. Mia followed him outside, the morning air crisp and fresh after the storm. The truck was exactly as he remembered, old, battered, and barely functional. Daniel popped the hood and let out a low whistle. Damn, This thing's been running on sheer willpower. Mia peeked over his shoulder, frowning. That bad? He shot her a look. You tell me, when's the last time you got an oil change? She hesitated. A while ago. He sighed. Thought so. Daniel got to work, checking fluids, tightening loose parts and assessing the damage. He had expected rust and wear, but what surprised him was the sheer neglect. Whoever had owned this truck before her either didn't know or didn't care how to take care of an engine. You really don't know anything about cars, do you? He asked after a while. Mia laughed, and for the first time it sounded genuine. Is it that obvious? Painfully. She leaned against the truck, watching him work. My dad always handled stuff like this. I never had to. Daniel glanced up. It was the first real personal detail she had let slip. That's so. She nodded, but didn't elaborate. Daniel didn't push. Instead, he wiped his hands on a rag and stepped back. Well, good news is I can fix it. Bad news is it's gonna take some time. Mia looked almost relieved. How long? A couple days at least. Need to order some parts. She bit her lip, as if considering something. Guess I'll have to find a place to stay. Daniel hesitated. He wasn't in the habit of inviting strangers to linger, but something about the way she said it, like she didn't have anywhere else to go, made him rethink. There's a diner down the road, he said instead. They might know someone renting out a room. Mia nodded, but she didn't move right away. She lingered, watching him as if she wanted to say something else. Finally, she spoke. You're really kind. You know that. Daniel let out a dry chuckle. I'm just a mechanic. She tilted her head slightly. No, you're more than that. For a moment he didn't know what to say. Compliments weren't something he heard often, and especially not from someone like her, someone who clearly came from a different world. Before he could reply, Mia pushed off the truck. I should head out, see if I can find that diner. Daniel nodded, watching as she walked away. There was something about her that didn't add up, and the more he tried to ignore it, the more he found himself wanting to figure out exactly who Mia really was. The morning sun filtered through the open garage doors, casting golden streaks over Daniel's workbench. The scent of motor oil, metal, and fresh coffee filled the air. He had already been up for hours, busying himself with other repairs while waiting for parts to arrive for Mia's truck. He wasn't expecting to see her again so soon. The bell above the garage door chimed as she stepped inside, hesitating for just a second before fully entering. Dressed in jeans and a simple flannel, she looked more like she belonged here than she had the night before, though there was still something just slightly off, like she was playing a role she hadn't quite mastered. Daniel glanced up from under the hood of an old Ford pickup. Didn't expect you back so soon, Mia shrugged. Figured I'd check in, and well, I don't really have anywhere else to be. There it was again, that quiet, unspoken weight behind her words. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag, considering her for a moment. You eat yet? She shook her head. He jerked his head toward the small kitchen in the corner. There's coffee and some leftover biscuits. Not fresh, but better than nothing. Mia smiled, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. You always this hospitable? Nope, he said. Just don't want you passing out in my shop. She laughed, a real full laugh this time, and it surprised him how much he liked the sound of it. Over the next couple of days, Mia kept coming back. She didn't have a job, and she didn't seem in a hurry to move on. At first, Daniel thought she was just killing time while waiting for her truck to be fixed. But the more they talked, the more he realized she was lingering for a different reason. She was trying to learn. One afternoon, as he tightened the bolts on her truck's engine, she sat on a stool nearby, watching intently. What are you doing now? She asked. Daniel exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. Checking the timing belt. If this thing's shot, the whole engine could go to hell. Mia frowned. Engines have belts? He paused, giving her a look. You seriously don't know that? She grinned sheepishly. I know cars move, I just don't know how. Daniel shook his head, suppressing a smirk. All right, Princess. Lesson 1. Princess, she interrupted, raising an eyebrow. He leaned against the truck, arms crossed. You got soft hands, no calluses, and judging by the fact that you couldn't even figure out my coffee maker, I'd say you weren't exactly raised fixing things. Mia's expression wavered for just a second, just long enough for Daniel to notice, but then she covered it with a smirk. So what? You're saying I can't learn? He studied her for a beat, then handed her a wrench. Fine, let's see what you got. She took it, gripping it awkwardly, and Daniel tried not to laugh. You hold that like you're about to stab someone. Mia rolled her eyes. Maybe I am. Despite her protests, she listened as he explained the basics. He showed her how to check the oil, how to listen for engine trouble, and even let her change a tire under his supervision. She struggled, but she was determined, and there was something oddly endearing about the way she bit her lip in concentration when trying to twist a stubborn bolt. By the end of the day, her hands were covered in grease. She held them up, looking at them as if they belonged to someone else. Huh, she said. I think this is the dirtiest I've ever been. Daniel smirked. Congratulations. You're officially a mechanic in training. She grinned, wiping her hands on a rag. I'll put that on my resume. Daniel leaned against the truck, arms crossed. You know, you don't have to stick around here. Mia hesitated. Do you want me to leave? It was an honest question. Daniel considered it for a moment. He had spent most of his life alone, and he had never minded it. But lately, the garage didn't seem as quiet as it used to. Nah, he admitted. I don't. Mind the company. Mia's smile was small but genuine. Me neither. That night, the air was warm and still, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth from the storm days before. Mia sat on the tailgate of an old truck parked outside the shop, staring up at the sky. Daniel leaned against the side of the truck, sipping from a beer bottle. They had fallen into an easy silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled with words. You ever think about leaving this town? Mia asked suddenly. Daniel glanced at her. Not really. Why not? He shrugged. Got everything I need here, don't see much reason to go. Mia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I envy that. Daniel studied her profile, the way her expression softened in the moonlight. Where exactly are you running from? Mia's fingers tightened around the edge of the truck bed. Who says I'm running? Daniel didn't press. He just gave her a knowing look. She sighed, shaking her head. I don't know. I guess I just needed a change. From what? Mia hesitated, then finally met his gaze. A life that never really felt like mine. Daniel didn't ask for details. He figured she'd tell him when she was ready. Instead, he just took another sip of his beer and said, Well, you picked the right place. Ain't much out here, but at least it's quiet. Mia smiled. Yeah, I think I like that. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel realized he didn't mind the quiet either, not when she was there to share it. The morning sun was already high by the time Daniel arrived at the garage. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh dew and motor oil. He had gotten used to starting his day alone, but now he half expected to find Mia waiting for him, eager to learn something new about cars. Sure enough, there she was, sitting cross-legged on the hood of her truck, flipping through an old car manual with a look of sheer determination. Daniel smirked as he walked past. Trying to impress me? Mia huffed and set the book down. Trying to understand how this stupid engine works. You make it look easy. That's 'cause I've been doing it my whole life. He grabbed a wrench and nodded toward the truck. Come on, let's see what you remember from yesterday. Mia slid off the hood and grabbed the wrench, looking only slightly more confident than she had before. As she fumbled with the bolts, Daniel watched her closely, not just her hands, but the way she carried herself, the way she moved. Something still didn't add up. She was trying, that much was clear, But there was a stiffness to her movements, like she wasn't just inexperienced, she was entirely unfamiliar with this kind of work. Most people who grew up in small towns or had working-class backgrounds at least knew the basics. But Mia, she was starting from zero. And then there were the little things. The way she reacted when she accidentally got grease on her shirt, how she hesitated before touching anything too dirty, the way she winced when she bent her nails the wrong way against the wrench. She wasn't used to this life, not even close. "You ever worked a day in your life?" Daniel asked, suddenly watching. For her reaction, Mia stiffened slightly before masking it with a laugh. "Wow, thanks for the vote of confidence." "I'm serious," he pressed. "You don't strike me as someone who's spent much time fixing things." She hesitated, then shrugged. "I've had jobs." "What kind?" She wiped her hands. On a rag, avoiding his gaze. "You ask a lot of questions, you know that?" Daniel leaned against the truck, arms crossed. "Only when things don't add up." Mia looked at him then, her expression unreadable. For a moment it seemed like she might tell him something real, but then, just as quickly, she forced a grin. "Maybe I just lived a sheltered life," she teased. Daniel didn't buy it, but he let it go. For now. Later that afternoon, while waiting for a shipment of parts, Daniel sat at his desk, sipping coffee and sorting through invoices. Mia had wandered off for a bit, saying she wanted to grab something from the diner down the road. It was the first time in days she had left the shop on her own. He should have gone back to work. He should have ignored the nagging feeling in his gut, but instead his eyes drifted toward the small bench where Mia had left her things. And that was when he saw it, her phone, lying face up on the table, the screen still glowing. Daniel wasn't the kind of man to snoop, but when he caught a glimpse of the message that had just come in, his stomach tightened. Unknown. Number. "Mia, where are you? This isn't a game. The board is asking questions." His jaw clenched. The board. What the hell did that mean? Before he could think too much about it, another message popped up. Unknown. Number. "Your shares are still active. If you don't come back soon, they'll make the decision for you." Daniel stared at the phone, his mind racing. Shares? The board? This wasn't just some runaway looking for a quiet life. Mia was hiding something big. By the time Mia returned, Daniel had forced himself to act normal. He didn't mention the messages. He didn't ask questions. But he watched her more closely. That evening, as they worked on her truck together, he decided to test his theory. "So, you said you grew up in a small town?" he asked casually. Mia nodded. "Yeah." "Farm girl?" She hesitated for just a second before nodding again. "Something like that." Daniel smirked. "All right then, what's the best way to milk a cow?" Mia blinked. "What?" "Simple question," he said, leaning against the truck. "You grew up around farms, right? You should know how to milk a cow." She opened her mouth, then closed it. "Well, you just grab and squeeze?" Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, that's one way to piss off a cow." Mia groaned, rubbing her temples. "Okay, fine. I didn't exactly grow up on a farm. Maybe just near one." "Uh-huh." She shot him a look. "What is this? An interrogation?" "Just making conversation." Mia sighed, crossing her arms. "All right. Your turn. You ever left this town?" Daniel shrugged. "No reason to. No curiosity about the world out there?" "Not really." She studied him for a long moment, then shook her head with a small smile. "You're a rare kind of person, Daniel." "Yeah?" "Yeah." She hesitated, then added softly, "I think I envy that." For the first time all day, Daniel saw something real in her eyes, something raw and unguarded, and for a moment he almost forgot about the messages on her phone. Almost. Daniel wasn't the type to dwell on things he couldn't explain. He had always lived his life in straightforward terms. Fix what's broken, help when you can. Don't ask too many questions. But Mia was different. She wasn't just another stranded traveler passing through town. She was hiding something, and now, after seeing those messages on her phone, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she was running from was a lot bigger than she let on. But what got to him most wasn't the mystery itself. It was the fact that he actually cared enough to wonder. The next day, Mia showed up at the garage like she had been doing all week. She walked in with that easy smile of hers, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the diner down the road. "Figured I owed you one," she said, handing him a cup. Daniel took it, eyeing her carefully. "You don't owe me anything," she gave him, a playful look. "Come on, just take the coffee. No hidden motives, I promise." Daniel didn't respond. He just took a sip, letting the silence stretch between them. Mia tilted her head. "You okay? You seem quiet." He hesitated, then shook his head. "Just thinking." Dangerous habit. That made him smirk, but only for a second. His mind was still running in circles, trying to piece things together. The messages, the way she dodged questions, the way she had clearly never worked with her hands a day in her life, despite claiming otherwise. She wasn't just a drifter. She was someone who had never struggled a day in her life, until now. And then, as if the universe wanted to confirm his suspicions, the final piece of the puzzle landed in his hands that very afternoon. It started with a delivery. Daniel had ordered a shipment of parts for Mia's truck, and while he was signing off on the invoice, the delivery guy, an older man named Joe, who had been coming through town for years, paused and squinted at the garage. "Huh," Joe said, scratching his beard. "Didn't expect to see her in a place like this." Daniel looked up. "What do you mean?" Joe nodded toward Mia, who was in the back, pretending to organize tools she barely knew how to use. "That girl," Joe said. "I swear I've seen her face before." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. "Where?" Joe frowned, thinking. "Hold on a sec." He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then turned the screen toward Daniel. Daniel's stomach dropped. It was a business magazine, the kind Daniel had never paid attention to. But right there, front and center, was a glossy photo of Mia, except she didn't look anything like the girl who had walked into his garage a few days ago. She was polished, standing in front of some massive skyscraper, dressed in a crisp blazer, and the headline, "Mia Davenport, the heiress who walked away from it all." Daniel barely heard Joe say, "Yeah, she's some rich girl from New York, right? Supposed to take over some big company, but then she up and disappeared. Lot of people been wondering where she went." Joe chuckled, shaking his head. "Guess now I know." Daniel's grip tightened around the phone. Mia wasn't just running. She was running from an entire life she had never told him about. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, Daniel sat on the hood of his truck, waiting. Mia had gone for a walk earlier, and when she finally returned, she looked tired, like she had spent the whole day carrying a weight too heavy for her shoulders. She spotted him and slowed, her expression cautious. "You okay?" she asked. Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "You ever gonna tell me the truth?" Mia froze. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she sat down on the truck beside him, staring at her hands. "What do you want to know?" she asked quietly. Daniel turned to her, his voice steady. "I know who you are, Mia." She flinched, but he kept going. "You're not just some girl passing through town. You're Mia Davenport." He watched her carefully, waiting for her to deny it, but she didn't. Instead, she let out a long, shaky breath. "Yeah," she whispered. "I am." Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "So, why are you here?" Mia hesitated, then met his gaze. "Because I didn't want to be her anymore." Daniel didn't know what to say to that. He had expected excuses, lies, half-truths, but not this, not raw honesty. Mia looked down at her hands again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I grew up in a world where everything was controlled, who I was, what I did, who I was supposed to become. I was never allowed to make my own choices, so I left. Daniel studied her carefully. Just like that, she let out a bitter laugh. Not exactly. I walked away from billions, Daniel. From a life most people would kill for, and for what? A broken-down truck and a town where no one knows my name. Daniel was quiet for a moment, then said, "Sounds like freedom." Mia blinked. "What?" He shrugged. "You said you wanted to make your own choices. Looks like you did." Mia stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly she smiled, and for the first time, Daniel realized something. He didn't care where she came from, he just cared that she was here. Daniel had always believed in honesty. It was a simple principle, one that guided the way he worked, the way he lived. And yet, sitting across from Mia now, he wasn't sure what to do with the truth she had finally given him. She was Mia Davenport, heiress to a corporate empire, a woman whose face had been printed in business magazines, whose name carried weight in boardrooms he would never step foot in. And she had been lying to him from the very beginning. The revelation sat heavy between them as they remained on the hood of his truck, the night air thick with unspoken words. Finally, Daniel exhaled. "So what now?" Mia glanced at him, her fingers twisting together. "What do you mean?" He shook his head. "You really think you can just stay here forever? That the world you left behind won't come looking for you?" Mia looked away, her jaw tightening. "I don't know. She swallowed hard. "I just wanted a chance to be me for once." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "And what does that even mean, Mia? Who are you?" Mia flinched. For a moment she seemed like she might argue, might throw up her usual wall of humor and deflection, but then her shoulders sagged. "I don't know," she admitted. "I grew up in boardrooms, surrounded by expectations. My father groomed me to take over the company before I even knew what I wanted. Every move I made was calculated, every decision controlled. And when he died, suddenly the entire empire was in my hands, and I realized I had never even lived my own life." She shook her head, laughing bitterly. "So I left. I walked away from billions, from a life people dream of because it never felt real to me." Daniel was quiet, letting her words settle. Then he said, "Must be nice." Mia's head snapped, up, her brow furrowing. "What?" "Having the luxury to just walk away." Mia's lips parted slightly, like she had expected sympathy and was caught off guard when she didn't get it. Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "You say you never got to make your own choices, but you did get to choose to leave. Not everyone gets that option." Mia's expression wavered, guilt flickering across her face. "I'm not saying your life was easy," Daniel continued, his tone softer now. "But out here, in this town, people don't get to run away from their problems. They've got mortgages, families to feed, no safety net. You had one whether you wanted it or not." Mia looked down, her fingers tightening against the hem of her shirt. "I know," she murmured, "and that's what scares me the most." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Mia exhaled slowly. "Because I know deep down that no matter how much I want to escape that world, I can't. Sooner or later it's going to pull me back in." Silence stretched between them, and that was the moment Daniel realized something painful. She would leave, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But eventually, Mia Davenport, heiress, billionaire, a woman who didn't belong in a small-town garage, would have to return to the life she had tried so hard to escape, and when that day came, he'd just be another stop along the way. The next morning, Daniel kept his distance. He busied himself with work, throwing himself into repairs, keeping his head down. He didn't know why he felt so restless, why the thought of Mia leaving gnawed at him like an itch he couldn't scratch. It wasn't like he had ever expected her to stay. She wasn't his to keep, and yet, when Mia walked into the garage later that afternoon, her smile cautious, Daniel barely looked up. "Hey," she said hesitantly. "Morning." He didn't meet her gaze. Mia shifted on her feet. "Everything okay?" "Yeah." A pause. Then in a quieter voice, she asked, "Are you mad at me?" Daniel exhaled sharply, setting his wrench down. "No." "Then why won't you look at me?" He wiped his hands on a rag before finally turning to her. "Because I don't do well with liars, Mia." Her face fell. "I didn't—" She stopped, shaking her head. "I didn't mean to lie, I didn't know how to tell you." Daniel studied her, his gaze unreadable. "And what would have happened if I never found out?" Mia's silence was answer enough. Daniel nodded to himself. "That's what I thought." She stepped closer. "Daniel," but he held up a hand. "Look, Mia, you don't owe me anything. You don't have to explain yourself to me. But don't stand there and pretend like this was ever going to last." Mia flinched, and for a brief second, Daniel regretted the words. But they were the truth. She swallowed hard, blinking quickly. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's jaw clenched. "What do you want from me?" Mia's lips parted slightly, as if she didn't know the answer to that herself. Then, quietly, she said, "I don't want to lose this." Daniel let out a bitter chuckle. "Mia, this was never real to begin with." Her breath hitched, pain flashing across her face. "It was real to me." Daniel froze. For the first time since she had walked into his life, he saw it. Saw the fear. Behind her bravado, the loneliness she had been carrying. And damn it, it hurt, but it didn't change the truth. "I don't know what you want me to say," he murmured. "You belong to a different world, Mia. One I don't fit into." Mia's hands clenched into fists. "Who says I have to belong to that world?" Daniel looked at her then, his eyes searching hers. "You do." Mia's face crumbled. For a long, aching moment, neither of them spoke. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of the garage. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt like he had just lost something he wasn't ready to let go of. The days after Mia left were quiet. Too quiet. Daniel had always been comfortable with solitude. He worked best alone, his hands busy with grease and metal, the rhythmic clatter of tools against machinery filling the space where conversation usually wasn't needed. But now the silence felt different, hollow in a way he hadn't expected. He told himself it didn't matter. Mia had never belonged here. That was the truth. And yet every time he walked into the garage, he caught himself looking toward the spot where she used to sit, flipping through that old car manual like she actually understood it. Every time he picked up a wrench, he thought about the way she had struggled to use one, biting her lip in frustration but refusing to quit. It was ridiculous. She was gone, and he had work to do. The following afternoon, Daniel was elbow deep in an engine when he heard the door to the garage creak open. For a split second, his heart did something stupid, something he refused to acknowledge. But when he turned, it wasn't Mia. It was Mrs. Thompson, one of the older women in town. She owned the small bakery down the street, the kind of place where people gathered not just for coffee and pastries, but for gossip and community. She gave him a knowing look as she stepped inside. "Heard she left." Daniel wiped his hands on a rag. "You heard right," Mrs. Thompson sighed, tucking her hands into the pockets of her apron. "Shame. I liked her." Daniel grunted, focusing back on the engine. "Didn't realize you knew her that well." "Oh, I knew enough," she said. "Enough to see she was trying." Daniel frowned. "Trying for what?" Mrs. Thompson smiled softly. "To belong." Daniel's grip tightened around the wrench. The older woman studied him for a moment, then shook her head with a chuckle. "You know, for a man who fixes things for a living, you sure are blind when it comes to seeing what's broken." Daniel exhaled sharply, setting the wrench down with a little more force than necessary. And what's that supposed to mean? Mrs. Thompson raised an eyebrow. You miss her. Daniel let out a dry laugh. It's not that simple, isn't it? He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. She's got a whole life waiting for her, a life I have no part in. Mrs. Thompson just smiled, wise and patient. Maybe that's not your choice to make. Daniel had no response to that, because, deep down, he knew she was right. That night, Daniel found himself at home, staring at the envelope on his kitchen table. Mia's letter. She had left it the day she walked away, and he had ignored it until now, refusing to acknowledge the weight of it. But now, as he sat alone in his quiet house, he finally opened it. Her handwriting was neat but slightly rushed, as if she had been afraid she wouldn't finish writing before she lost the nerve to leave. Daniel, I don't know if you'll ever read this. But if you do, I just want you to know I'm sorry. I never meant to lie to you, and I never meant to get attached. But somehow, in the middle of oil changes and terrible coffee, you became the one person who made me feel like I was enough. Just as I am. I don't know where I'm going next. Maybe back to the life I left behind. Maybe somewhere new. But no matter where I end up, I want you to know, these past few weeks, they were the most real thing I've ever had. I don't expect you to understand, and I definitely don't expect you to follow me, but I think part of me wishes you would. Mia. Daniel read the letter twice, then 3 times. His chest felt tight, his pulse unsteady. He was a man who believed in logic, in fixing what was in front of him, not chasing what was already gone. But damn it, he couldn't ignore the truth any longer. He missed her, not just in the way you miss something temporary, something fleeting. He missed her in the way that made him realize he had let go of something he wasn't ready to lose, and that scared the hell out of him. The next morning, Daniel did something he hadn't done in years. He closed the garage, locked the doors, and got in his truck. He didn't have a plan. He didn't even know where to start looking, but he had made a choice. For the first time in his life, he wasn't fixing something, he was fighting for it. Mia had always imagined that returning to the world she had left behind would feel suffocating, that the moment she stepped back into the towering glass walls of corporate life, she'd lose the small piece of freedom she had stolen for herself. And, in many ways, she had been right. The moment she arrived back in New York, it was as if she had never left. The doorman at her building greeted her like usual. The assistant she had abandoned months ago rushed to reorganize her schedule. The board members who had been circling like vultures barely looked surprised to see her walk into the meeting room, as if they had known all along that she wouldn't stay gone forever. Her life was waiting for her exactly where she had left it. So why did it feel so empty? It had been 3 weeks since she left the small town. 3 weeks since she had walked away from Daniel. She told herself it was for the best. Daniel was right. She did belong to this world, whether she wanted to or not. There was no escaping it, no matter how far she ran. But that didn't stop her from missing him. It was the little things. The smell of motor oil on his shirt, the way he called her princess just to annoy her, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her like she was more than just a name on a magazine cover. She missed the way her hands had gotten dirty working on cars, the way the town had felt like home in a way New York never did. But most of all, she missed the feeling of belonging, the kind that had nothing to do with stockholders or corporate legacies. She had tried to forget, thrown herself back into work, attended meetings, sat in boardrooms where decisions worth millions were made with the flick of a pen. But every time she looked out the window of her penthouse office, all she could think about was a garage in the middle of nowhere, and a man she had left behind. One night, unable to sleep, Mia found herself scrolling through news articles, catching up on what had happened in her absence, and that was when she saw it. An article buried beneath stories of market trends and business, deals, A small feature about a new program providing funding to small-town businesses, and there, in the middle of the page, was a picture of Daniel's garage. Mia's breath caught in her throat as she skimmed the article. The program was meant to help struggling mechanics and repair shops in rural areas, businesses like Daniel's, places that kept their communities running but rarely had the financial backing to grow, and the person funding it? Mia. She had done it almost unconsciously, signing off on the initiative in the middle of a mountain of paperwork. At the time, it had just been another way to make use of the wealth she barely cared about. But now, seeing his garage on the screen, knowing she had done something for him even from a distance, it made her realize something. She could pretend all she wanted. She could tell herself she was supposed to be here in this world of suits and contracts, but her heart was still somewhere else, and maybe it always would be. The next day, Mia walked into the boardroom, took her usual seat at the head of the long, polished table, and made a decision. "I'm stepping down." The room fell silent. For a second, no one moved. No one even breathed. Then one of the board members, a man who had worked for her father for years, adjusted his tie and cleared his throat. "Excuse me?" Mia exhaled, steadying herself. "You heard me. I'm stepping down as CEO. Effective immediately." Another board member, a woman known for her ruthless negotiation skills, leaned forward, expression unreadable. "You just got back, Mia. This company needs you." "No," Mia said simply, "it doesn't." And she meant it. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of letting go. She had spent so many years believing she had no choice, that she had to be the person her father had groomed her to be. But that wasn't true. Daniel had shown her that. And now she was finally ready to live her life on her terms. That night, as she packed a single suitcase, Mia felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if Daniel would even want to see her again, but there was one thing she did know. She was going back, and this time she wasn't running away. She was running home. Daniel had spent most of his life fixing broken things. Engines that had been run to the ground, tires worn to the rim, transmissions that should have been scrapped years ago. But there were some things that couldn't be fixed with a wrench. He had tried to move on after Mia left, tried to convince himself it didn't matter, that she had been a temporary part of his life, just another visitor passing through town. But every time he walked into the garage, he felt the absence of her laughter. Every time he picked up a tool, he remembered her clumsy attempts at fixing her own truck, and every time he lay awake at night, he thought about the way she had looked at him before she walked away. Like she wanted him to stop her, but knew he never would. It took him too long to realize the truth. He had let her go because he thought it was the right thing to do, but now he wasn't so sure. It started with the letter. The one she had left behind, the one he had ignored for days because he wasn't ready to face what it meant. But once he read it, there was no going back. Mia had wanted him to come after her. Maybe she hadn't said it outright, but he saw it in her words, in the way she had written, "I don't expect you to follow me," like she was daring him to prove her wrong. And damn it, he was going to. For the first time in years, Daniel locked up the garage and left town without a second thought. He didn't have an address, didn't even know if she would still be there when he arrived. But it didn't matter, because he finally understood something. Mia hadn't been the only one running. He had been running too. Afraid to admit that he had let someone into his life. Afraid to acknowledge that he needed her in a way that terrified him. He wasn't afraid anymore. New York City was a world away from what Daniel knew. The noise, the people, the endless movement. It was the opposite of the quiet life he had built for himself, but none of it mattered, because he wasn't here for the city. He was here for her, and he had no intention of leaving without her. It took him hours to find her. Office building, longer still to figure out how to get inside without getting thrown out by security. By the time he stepped into the lobby, his boots tracking in dust from a town that no one here had probably ever heard of, people were already staring. He ignored them. He was only looking for one person. The receptionist blinked up at him, clearly startled by the sight of a man who looked like he belonged in a garage, not in a corporate skyscraper. "Sir, can I help?" "I'm here for Mia Davenport," Daniel said, his voice steady. The receptionist hesitated. "Do you have an appointment?" Daniel exhaled sharply. "No, but I'm not leaving until I see her." Before she could respond, a voice cut through the room. "Daniel." He turned, and there she was. Mia stood at the top of the marble staircase, staring at him like he was the last person in the world she had expected to see. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Daniel took a step forward. "I don't care how much money you have," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I don't care what world you come from or what world you think you belong to." Mia's breath hitched. Daniel kept going. "All I care about is whether you're happy." His gaze locked onto hers. "And if you're not, then I want to fix that." Mia clutched the railing, her fingers tightening around the polished wood. People were watching now. Whispers spread through the lobby, businessmen and assistants pausing to see what was unfolding before them. But Daniel didn't care. He had spent his whole life keeping his emotions in check, keeping himself guarded. Not this time. He took another step closer. "I let you walk away once, Mia." His voice softened. "I'm not making that mistake again." Mia's eyes glistened, her lips parting slightly. For a moment she looked like she might say something. Then, suddenly, she was moving. Before Daniel could react, she was running down the stairs, past the onlookers, straight toward him. And then she was in his arms. He caught her without thinking, wrapping her tightly against him as she buried her face into his chest. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then, in a muffled voice, Mia whispered, "You idiot." Daniel let out a breathless chuckle, pressing his chin against her hair. "Yeah, took me long enough to figure that out." She pulled back just enough to look up at him. "You came for me." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Yeah," he murmured, "and I'm not going anywhere unless you come with me." Mia stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she smiled, and Daniel knew right then and there that he had finally found something he wasn't afraid to fight for. The road stretched ahead, golden fields rolling past under the soft glow of the evening sun. The wind rushed through the open windows of the truck, carrying with it the scent of earth and wildflowers. Mia sat in the passenger seat, her fingers lightly tracing patterns against the worn leather of the dashboard. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't running. She was going home. Daniel glanced over at her, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "You sure you're ready for small-town life again? No high-rises, no fancy boardrooms, no corporate deals?" Mia turned to face him, her expression soft. "I never belonged in those places, Daniel." "Not really," he raised an eyebrow. "And you think you belong in a garage with a grumpy mechanic?" Mia smiled, reaching over to take his hand. "I think I belong with you." Daniel exhaled slowly, squeezing her hand before bringing it to his lips. He wasn't a man of flowery words or grand gestures, but he didn't need them. Not with her. By the time they reached town, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, dusky glow over the streets. The town square was quiet, the hum of life settling in for the night, but as they pulled up to the garage, something unexpected awaited them. Lights, strings of warm bulbs were strung across the entrance, glowing softly in the dark. A small crowd had gathered, familiar faces, the people who had been part of Daniel's world long before Mia ever stepped into it. Mrs. Thompson, from the bakery, stood at the front, hands on her hips. Joe, the old delivery driver, leaned against his truck, grinning. Even the sheriff was there, nodding approvingly. Maya blinked. "What is this?" Daniel looked just as confused as she did. "Beats me." As they stepped out of the truck, Mrs. Thompson approached, a twinkle in her eye. "Took you long enough to bring her back." Mia laughed, shaking her head. "You knew I was coming?" The older woman shrugged. "Daniel might be stubborn, but he's not a fool. We had a feeling he wouldn't let you get away that easily." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "Jesus, do you people have nothing better to do than gossip about my love life?" Joe chuckled. "Not when it's this interesting." Mia turned to Daniel, her heart swelling at the sight of it all. These people, this place, had welcomed her in ways she had never expected, and now it was home. A week later, the garage officially reopened, but it wasn't just a garage anymore. It was theirs. With Mia's help, they expanded it into something more, a garage that not only fixed cars, but also provided free services for those who couldn't afford repairs. A place where people could gather, where kids could learn the trade, where no one was ever turned away, and attached to it, right next door, was something else entirely. A cafe. Mia's idea. She had wanted to build something of her own. Something small but meaningful. And so, where there had once been an empty lot, there was now a cozy little coffee shop filled with the scent of fresh-baked pastries and the sound of laughter. It was the perfect blend of both their worlds, Daniel's rugged, hands-on craftsmanship, and Mia's warmth and vision, and together it worked. One evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and gold, Mia stood outside the shop, wiping down the last of the outdoor tables. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Daniel approaching, his hands in his pockets. He stopped in front of her, studying her for a moment. Then, without a word, he pulled something from his pocket and held it out, a small, worn-out key. Mia frowned. "What's this?" Daniel smirked. "Key to the garage." She blinked. "I thought I already had one." "You do?" He hesitated, then added, "But this one's different." Mia tilted her head, waiting. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "You left once, and I know you're not the type to be tied down. But if you ever feel like running again—" He pressed the key into her palm. "Just remember, you always have a home here." Mia stared at him, her throat tightening. She had spent so much of her life feeling like she had to choose between expectation and freedom, between the past and the future. But now she realized she didn't have to run anymore, because she had already found what she was looking for. She stepped forward, wrapping her arms around his neck, pulling him into a kiss that tasted like promises kept and a future waiting to be lived. And when they pulled apart, she whispered, "I'm exactly where I want to be." Daniel smiled, brushing his thumb over her cheek. "Good, 'cause I don't plan on letting you go again." The world was quiet around them, the stars just beginning to appear in the vast stretch of sky above. And as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, in a town where love was built on patience and second chances, Mia knew this was her home, and it always would be. And that, my friends, is the story of The Mechanic and the Millionaire, a journey of love, second chances, and finding where you truly belong. But now, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me, where are you watching from? Are you tuning in from a quiet small town like Daniel's, or a big bustling city like the one Mia left behind? Drop your location in the comments. I'd love to know how far this story has traveled. What did you think of the ending? Did it leave you with the warm, satisfying feeling of a perfect love story, or do you wish there was more? Let's talk about it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you love stories that touch the heart, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another one. There's so much more coming your way. Thank you for watching, for being part of this journey, and for sharing your time with me. Your support means the world, and I can't wait to bring you more stories that stay with you long after the last word is spoken. Until next time, stay inspired, stay kind, and keep believing in love. Subscribe now, and I'll see you in the next one.